Hi, everyone. Are you able to hear me? Perfect. Perfect. Well, I want to welcome everyone to this month's edition of Ballpark Figures. I am Shakeia Taylor. I am a writer for the Chicago Tribune. I write sports, history, and culture. Um, and some of you may remember that I used to write for Baseball Prospectus, which our guest tonight is Craig Goldstein, the editor-in-chief of Baseball Prospectus. His recent articles include essays on the Houston Astros World Series championship, the expansion of baseball's postseason, upcoming rule changes, and bullpen management. His work has also appeared in Sports Illustrated, Vice Sports, Fox Sports MLB, and SB Nation MLB. Craig, you can turn your camera on, please.
Hello.
Hi. Hello?
Hello. Hi.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, that was me. That was me.
Okay.
Um, so I got to ask the obvious question, right? How is San Diego? I'm sure everyone wants to know, how is San Diego?
It was packed. I mean, first of all, the weather is fantastic. You adapt very quickly. I was already getting chilly when it was down to like 50 degrees, even though first night there, it's like, that's fine for a polo. Second night, I'm like, oh, I'm getting cold now. I was absolutely packed. The teams were bringing like 30, 40, 50 people in the hotel. So the lobby was packed, but it was great. It was great to be there. It was amazing to catch up with people I haven't seen, 3 years for the most part. The last one was back in San Diego in 2019. So it was really nice. Everyone was really happy to be there. Just a lot of conversations, a lot of talks, a lot of hugs and catching up with everybody.
That's really cool. I got to kind of live through it through everyone's pictures and videos, so that was fun. We'll talk about like team things that happened there in a little bit. Let's talk about you. How did you become editor-in-chief at Baseball Prospectus? Like, how did you get to that?
It's a fun story. I started I'll start with college. I went to University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and I entered freshman year with a major. I wanted to be in their sport management program. I'll be honest, I thought I wanted to be an agent when I applied and when I entered, and then I learned what an agent does. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. So I started looking more at the team side of things. I was reading Baseball Prospectus. I was reading Fangraphs. Rob Nyer, obviously now part of SABR, but he was at ESPN. His blog was really formative for me. And I just got really into analyzing things from the team side of things. And I thought it would be really cool to work in a front office, but I didn't really know how to go about doing that or take the most advantage of the resources the school had to offer. So I eventually interned for a minor league team kind of after I graduated, but there's a big difference between interning for a minor league team and interning for a major league team and being assigned to the minor league side or something like that. So I basically, after I graduated, I did a bunch of things while trying to kind of keep a foot in the water. And eventually a friend saw a posting to write at Fake Teams, which is an SB Nation fantasy, or was, I think it might no longer exist, but was an SB Nation fantasy baseball or fantasy sports site. And I started doing that. I did that for a little over a year. I wrote 3 times a week for free at the time, I think. And but I met people there. I was there when Brett Sayre, whose previous site went under, he joined. Other people, someone like Andrew Ball joined the site at one point. He's now one of the 3 people kind of in baseball ops running the Astros. So there are a lot of people kind of who've moved on. Brett Sayre is now the president of Baseball Prospectus, so people might put 2 and 2 together. He eventually moved on to the Baseball Prospectus fantasy team, and as he kind of ascended the hierarchy there, he brought me in. I started on the fantasy side writing, moved to editing on the minor league side, and eventually Came back as I was briefly away, came back as managing editor, and then a year later was promoted to editor-in-chief when Aaron Gleeman went to write for the Athletic.
What a journey. I talk to you all the time, and I didn't know most of that, so that was super informative. So Baseball Prospectus has like a really interesting lean, right? Not like, I feel like the stories are creative. They make even me interested in how well or how poorly someone is playing. Where do those ideas come from? Like, or do you guys sit around and like just kick around like really random stories, or like where are these coming from? Tell me about the Baseball Prospectus process. Pull back the curtain a little bit.
I'm really lucky to work with a lot of really talented people, yourself included. I think a lot of it stems from just having conversations. I think the articles that you and I worked on, we'd just be talking. We'd be talking about anything, life, other stuff, and then something would happen. We'd kind of start in on something like that, and it's like, oh, is there something here? Like, do you have something to say? Is what's going on with that? Do I have something to say? Maybe I'll write something about that. So I think it starts with the people, and I work with a lot of really talented people like Jenny Searle and Patrick Dubuque, who are my fellow editors. Mark Normanden's another editor. And again, these are people with a lot of experience by and large. I mean, Jenny's very young, but has done a lot with us already. And Patrick and Mark have been around for a very long time. And then we have a really great stable of writers. I'm always trying to keep an eye out for talented writers come from anywhere. I was just talking earlier with one of our writers, Robert Orr, who I think does really unique hitting analysis, stuff that is really hard to do. I couldn't do it myself, but I do have ideas. I'm constantly trying to answer questions for myself, and I'm lucky enough to have people I can go to and say, like, how does this work? Or can you try and explain this? And then, maybe they will, and maybe they won't be able to, but I'll say, is that something, we think we want to write about? Is there a different angle that's worth exploring? And I would say for the most part, like I said, it comes back to who I work with. I have a lot of really competent and interesting and talented people, and they'll come up with angles all their own. A lot of times I don't have to do anything. It's when I work with someone like Stephen Goldman, who has previously been an editor-in-chief at Baseball Prospectus. He taught, I worked with him at SB Nation originally, and he taught me so much about writing. And so I don't have to tell him how to write something, but we do workshop ideas, and he's got incredible prose, as do many of the other people I work with. And it really is, sometimes it's spitballing, sometimes it's, here's an idea fully formed, like, Zeus springing from Athena's head, like, here it is, and all you have to do is put it in the CMS and schedule it for the next day. And it's really a combination of things. And the thing I would always say about Baseball Prospectus is, it is what you make of it. Again, I went from an intern on the fantasy side to editor-in-chief because the people who were in charge when I was there rarely said no. And I really try and keep that alive and say, when someone asks, can they do something, or are you interested in this? Yeah, I'm interested in it, even if it's not something we would normally do. I think this. Like, I really I want to run good stuff. I don't want to put a boundary on what that is. Sometimes there are limits. Is this for us, or is it for someone else? Maybe so, but I really try and get to yes almost every time.
If you had to give just general baseball writing advice to anyone, what would it be?
So on a purely writing front, I think read what you write out loud. It is the most basic advice. I've received it. I don't always do it, but it's so hard not to catch mistakes when you actually read it out loud. You'll catch flow mistakes, you'll catch grammar mistakes, you'll catch so much if you just read it out loud. You can read it under your breath. It doesn't, you don't have to project it, no one else has to hear it, but read it out loud and you're going to catch so much, and you're going to fix. The first thing I said was flow, and that really is it. You're going to fix the flow of your articles because you'll hear it how other people are going to read it. People read it how, kind of how they talk. And so that you're going to catch so much of that. In the sense of advice for finding a way to write online or to get attention online, or just to disperse your opinion, whatever you want to call it. I don't think you have to write for a Baseball Prospectus or a Fangraphs or any of these other sites. I think if anyone's asking you to write, like I said, I wrote for free for SB Nation early on, and look, I benefited from that. I'm not going to pretend there aren't benefits to exposure or anything like that. I think what's really important, though, what people like me look for when reaching out to people or trying to see who else we can bring onto a site, is the ability to write consistently, to hit deadlines, and the quality of the work. Now, the quality of the work will be what it is, but editors are there to help, right? So don't be afraid, first of all, of the quality of your work. But more importantly, when I first read Ginny Searle, she was writing for her own blog. It was, just something she wrote for. She wasn't getting paid for it. There wasn't, but I went and read it, and this was a really talented person. And so that's what I said, okay, she wrote frequently. She's a much better writer than I am straight off the bat, but her prose is great. This is really good. She didn't need to write for someone else. I didn't need that proof. She didn't have to write for Beyond the Box Score or Fangraphs or anywhere else. All she had to do was write for herself. You can write for yourself. You can write on your own blog. Look, if someone else isn't going to pay you, you cannot pay yourself. And as long as you have the dedication and the discipline to do it, seriously, that's what matters. Because what honestly, one thing I will look for is a backlog. How often are you able to do it? Because that's part of what I need to. I think this, working at the paper for sure. Scheduling, right? Can I rely on you to turn it in when you say you are, or are you communicative when you can't, or whatever? So much of it is just administrative work. So, that's a huge part of it. And that's a huge thing that I look for sure.
I read everything I write out loud. It's kind of a weird habit because I think that my neighbors can hear me sometimes.
You feel a little crazy. It's true, but you catch so much. It's so worth it.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a good thing to do. Okay, so every year I notice that you get a lot of flack for PECOTA.
Yes.
What's PECOTA, and why does it make so many people so angry?
So PECOTA is our projection system. It's named, it was kind of what's the word? A backronym. So it is an acronym. It stands for something, but it was named after Bill PECOTA, a baseball player. Nate Silver developed the original name and formulas. And it is, I'm not going to go through what the name is, because again, it was just about naming it after PECOTA. But about Bill PECOTA. But the reason people get so mad is because someone came out and said something about it's a prediction, and predictions make people furious. And what people like today, and this is maybe there's some judgment, but I don't mean it with too much judgment, is telling people that their prediction was wrong. People love that. They love to do it at the time. They love to tell you in October that your April projection was wrong, all of this kind of stuff. It doesn't, I've gotten the sense lately, and again, this is kind of very online social media kind of sense, less than more so, I should say, than in person. But it's almost more important to tell someone they got it wrong than it was to actually celebrate your team winning. That's you know what I mean? It's at least 50-50. Maybe it's a little more important right now. So the reason it makes people upset is because, it's a projection system. It's based on the prior years. It's based on our projections of individual players, and then how they work within the team, kind of a team strength model. And then we build in the schedule. It's extremely detailed. Our stats team, Harry Pavlidis and Jonathan Judge, Judge really especially does a ton of work on this every year. We're constantly trying to improve it. But, anytime you make a prediction, no matter what it is, you're not going to get them all right. And people don't want to tell, it's kind of the old trope, it's like, oh, like you've always hated my team. And it's like, well, it's really just math on the back. Like there's no thumb on the scale. There's nothing like that. It's just what it says. And you don't have to like it. I don't always agree with it. You know what I mean? I don't always agree with what we spit out, but it's an interesting, it's a point of view that does something different than my point of view is. And I try and learn from that. Sometimes I think, I come away thinking it's still wrong. Other times I think, oh, I didn't really realize, like, maybe this team's depth chart isn't quite as strong up top as I thought, or, oh, there are kind of signs of degradation that I didn't realize were there. So yeah, I think it presents an opinion, and online, that's one of the most dangerous things you can do.
Yeah, I look forward to your mentions every year when those come
well, that makes
out.
one of us.
I mean, of course. So let's talk about Cody Bellinger. Well, first tell us about the jersey, and then let's talk about Cody Bellinger.
Yeah, it's an autographed jersey so I'm a Dodgers fan. I'm from outside the DC area. I'm in Bethesda, Maryland, and people always say, okay, why are you a Dodgers fan? My dad grew up originally in Albany, New York, was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, eventually moved to East Paterson, New Jersey, and stayed a Dodgers fan. And so I rooted for who my dad rooted for growing up. So I've been a Dodgers fan my whole life. It's helped me out because I've always watched those West Coast games. I now have like West Coast hours, which is great as an editor because writers love to turn things in last minute. So it's helping me out right now. But the Bellinger jersey is the second Dodgers World Series. Who is the player on the wall? I'm interrupting. I apologize. That is also Dodgers, Jackie Robinson. This was a wedding gift someone gave me as one of, 1,000 prints of that. Also, I thought it was a beautiful rendering. So I put that on the wall as well. But yeah, so Bellinger, that was after the 2020 World Series, second World Series of my lifetime. I was 2 years old. If anyone wants to do the math, I'm 36. But I was 2 years old when they won in '88. And it was kind of, the first one I remember of my lifetime. And I wanted to celebrate. It was a autographed jersey. And I thought this was a former MVP. He had the big home run to get them to the World Series in Game 7 of the NLCS. And then he, dislocated his shoulder celebrating a home run, and things have gone downhill since. He's no longer on the team. I don't know. Maybe I have to take it down, but I kind of don't want to. I have to think about that. It's a tumultuous offseason for me on this front.
Well, I mean, how do you feel about him going to Chicago? Maybe down the street from me, actually.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard. I think this era of the Dodgers has been really special. They've had a ton of great players. Bellinger was such a big part of it, obviously the MVP season. And to watch kind of the downfall has been really hard. I certainly understand it. I mean, the team non-tendered him and he got almost as much money as I think he would have through the arbitration process. I think it kind of at this point made sense for them to part ways. Hopefully he can find something somewhere else. I'd love to see again, that year where he won the MVP with Christian Yelich having just an absolutely monster season. And then both of them now in the AL Central kind of shells of their former selves. I'd love to see both of them get back to it. I mean, like their natural talent, if you want to call it that, is just unbelievable. And it's just been such a bummer to kind of see it play out the way it has. Obviously, injury is a huge factor for both of them. Yelich fouled the ball off his knee, and Bellinger had the shoulder injuries, dislocation. He broke his leg, in a collision at first base. He's had back injuries. And so really, I just hope he's healthy. I was moderately encouraged. Dave Roberts seemed to think he could get back to his former self. Sounds like he's really healthy into this offseason for the first time in a while. I'm hopeful he can turn it around. Obviously, I wished you would have done it for the Dodgers as a fan, but as a non-fan, I root for these guys to succeed overall.
I'm looking forward to seeing him here. I think it'll be fun either way. Like, it'll be an improvement for the Cubs, like either way. um, which what do you think the White Sox should do? I'm asking this because I noticed on my timeline people are talking about trading Tim Anderson, and I'm kind of surprised by that.
I think the White Sox are in a really interesting spot. They haven't really spent the money to augment this core in a way you see a lot of the other top tier teams doing, teams like the Dodgers. And there are teams that don't quite have to do that. I think, you can look at the Astros. They traded for Verlander and extended him prior to this year. But they had an incredible development system that when you can churn out Christian Javier, you don't always need to spend. And I think the White Sox have this really, really talented core, but you're starting to see kind of put up or shut up time. And right now they have one AL Central title to that core. And they didn't get very far in the playoffs that year. So I think I don't think the playoffs are everything, but I think so much was expected out of this team. And there are a lot of ways you can kind of see this going wrong, in the sense that it went wrong last year. And I think so much went wrong last year, and they still were kind of on the fringes of that discussion. Cleveland put them away towards the end of that season. But all of those isolated incidents that went wrong, you can kind of see it happening again, right? Luis Robert, like his injuries, that can happen again. Michael Kopech had a knee injury. Those are tough for pitchers. We've seen Zach Eflin have recurring knee injuries as another free agent this offseason. But, those are tough for players. Will Dylan Cease be a Cy Young quality pitcher again? You could see that, but it could also backslide a little bit. They just have so many, Yohan Moncada is a mystery wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in an enigma. I think the most consistent guy they have is Tim Anderson. And that's why you see people talk about trading him, is because I think you see that they say, like, well, is this do we start to tear things down? You've got 2 years left. Is this the guy we could get the most for? I think that's kind of crazy. I think Tim Anderson is like one of the coolest guys on the planet, and I would want him on my team. And
Right.
You build around that guy, and they have a lot of people to build around. They have a lot of elite talent, but they haven't filled in the gaps in a useful way. They tend to go to the Adam Eatons, the AJ Pollocks, these guys that aren't necessarily bad, but the upside is limited. And I said this in the offseason. Now, they were never going to spend what the Yankees just spent to retain Aaron Judge, but why aren't they in that conversation? They're in Chicago. He's exactly what they need. He's a power and average hitting corner outfielder. This is what they've been dying for years. And this is the other part, is that they have the same problem year over year over year. They're not fixing that issue, and they're wasting this incredible core of talent in the process. And so that's why I think people end up bringing up like trading these guys. And I do wonder again, like, Lucas Giolito's a free agent after this year. Tim Anderson has 2 team options left that they're definitely going to exercise, but that's the amount of control you have. You start running out of you have to start paying these guys more if you want to retain them. You start running out of guys. All of a sudden, this core that you thought you had for a long time, it's dissipating really quickly.
Oh, we have questions for you already.
Okay.
What do you think of the Mets giving up on DeGrom and going with Verlander, who's older?
Obviously very similar pitchers. I think age is similar in terms of high-end quality, but with some health question marks, with some durability question marks. Verlander just threw 175 innings. I'm not trying to take a shot at his durability, but he was coming off Tommy John surgery. I think they're going to be relatively careful. I don't think he's going to go out and be a 230 inning guy again at any point. DeGrom threw 90 innings. I wrote up his transaction analysis at BP. I mean, the guy is he breaks the game legitimately. Like he baseball kind of doesn't, it works differently for him than it does for anyone else. But unfortunately, in so doing, he seems to break his body. I mean, he's had the most unusual kind of career progression in terms of he keeps, into his 30s, he's throwing harder and harder and harder. He's retaining his command. I mean, he is the best pitcher on the planet when he's healthy, but it's obviously taking a toll on him physically. I do need to throw out this one stat that I had for my write-up, which is for starters over 150 innings in the last two seasons, 21 and 22 combined. So it's not that many innings, but it's a threshold that let me include Jacob deGrom. So it's cherry picked. But his strikeout rate was 44%. Number two in that category was Carlos Rodon at 34%. So 10 percentage point difference between number one and number two. That same difference between deGrom, from Rodon is from second to 54th, Logan Gilbert. So the amount that deGrom was better than Carlos Rodon at 1-2 was 2 to 54 from Rodon to Gilbert. I mean, it's a staggering amount better. You know what I mean? He's an incomparable player. But I think I understand he opted out. He got more years and money than the Mets were willing to give. And the Mets really valued that short-term nature. And I think Verlander is a more than adequate backfill for someone like deGrom. And you can count on the innings he's going to give you. I think the big concern that you have with him and Max Scherzer in tow is, these guys are wearing out. They are getting older and no one can really go forever. Everyone has a limit. And we saw that with Scherzer a bit last year, tiring out by the end. I know he had some injuries, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. And we saw it with deGrom too.
As a Dodgers fan, how much more elite gas do you think Kershaw has left in the tank?
Well, I don't think he has much. Well, you mean like the ability to stay elite, I'm guessing. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because it's in terms of gas on the fastball, it's not there. He keeps getting slower and slower. There's obviously there's been years now where he's had his slider is basically the same velocity as the fastball. So you mean the ability to stay elite? I think he can keep doing this. I mean, he's maniacal in his work ethic, his work rate. He is so focused on the mound. And I think the big thing is the fact that he's been able to adapt with less of a fastball. I mean, again, he's lost several ticks off his prime fastball, and he still makes it work like this. Now, I think like these other guys we're talking about in deGrom and Verlander or Scherzer, he's going to miss time. I don't think he's a 32 start or necessarily even a 30 start guy every year. I think he's going to be a 150 inning pitcher. But I think he can continually put up ERAs that start in the two, start with a 2 every time. I think for years, yeah, probably. I would say he could probably do it till he's, 4 more years till he's 36, 37, 38, something in that range. Again, everyone has a breaking point, but I don't know why he couldn't do it just like these other guys have that we've been talking about.
What do you think about the Brewers getting Winker and really bounce back?
I think there's a good chance he bounces back. T-Mobile Field was last year anyway the worst park to be a left-handed power hitter in. So I think that's some of it. Look, people have obviously reported on in detail kind of the culture fit. There are a lot of things I think between Winker and Seattle that just really didn't work out. And I think going to I'm going to call it Miller Park. I know it has a different name right now, but I'm going to take being in my mid 30s and call it what I remember it as. I think that's a good fit for him in terms of a park. I don't think they're going to try and push him into the field too often. He's not a good fielder. So I think how they're going to use him is going to be really helpful for Winker. And I think the park fit and the team fit is going to be better for him for sure.
Who's the player you think will improve the most this season that might surprise us?
Oh, these questions are always so tough. It's like thinking on your feet. I am gonna have to think on this one. I do want to come back. I don't want to bypass it. I do want to come back to it, but I am gonna have to think about it. It's always so tough to think about like who's a surprise to someone else, you know? So I'm going to think on that, Ruth. I appreciate it, but I'm going to have to come back to it.
Which new rules will have the greatest effect on the game next year?
So I think it's going to be the pickoff rule. I don't think the bases being bigger is a massive change. I think it kind of builds on the pickoff rule. The shift ban, I've mentioned this elsewhere, but I really, it's something I'm philosophically against. I don't like dictating to teams kind of like specifically how they can play the game, where they can position people, how to play defense. I think that like cracking those things is really some of the more interesting parts of the game. Whether I think it's true of baseball, but I think it's true of almost anywhere, almost any sport. But I also think like, am I going to be mad if some left-hander pulls the ball and it ends up as a single instead of instead of an out? No, I'm not going to be mad. I don't think anyone's really going to be upset about that. And I think what bothers me about that rule, the shift ban, is that it doesn't incentivize what they think it does. Now we're going to get more singles, which they want. They want that result, but it doesn't incentivize guys to stop using kind of the 3 true outcomes approach. It does, these lefty power hitters are still going to swing for the fences, and they might just happen to get a few more singles out of it. But there's nothing in terms of incentives that, that's just an added bonus for them now. Instead of making an out with the exact same approach, they get a base hit. But I think overall it's fine. And I don't think I'm going to have a problem with it practically, even though I don't like it philosophically. The pickoff rule is really where it gets interesting to me. And again, I don't think philosophically I don't like it, but I don't think I'm going to have a problem with it. But I think it's going to be a really big aesthetic change, in that I think we are going to see a lot more guys run. I think we are going to see, pitchers backed into a corner on they've thrown over once, or they've stepped off and they've thrown over, and now there's a cat and mouse game. They can still throw over. They can still throw over a third time, but they have to get the out. If they don't get the out, the runner moves on. And I think that's going to be really interesting and a really big change. And it's such a small kind of rule, but I think it is going to have a really significant effect on stolen base totals, and also just on kind of the interaction with the game. I guess the other really big one is the pitch clock, which I'm a huge fan of. And I think that will be a big change, but I think it's going to be extremely positive. And I'm less sure about the pickoff rule. I think it'll be okay, but I do think it's going to be kind of a bigger thing than people might be thinking of.
Okay, the next question is, why is baseball so white? I mean, he goes on to say, psychometric evaluation has determined that there is more potential talent in Black high schools and HBCUs than in all of MLB. Coach Roger Cador proved that. Traditional scouting is so biased and flawed. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think traditional scouting absolutely is biased and flawed. I think non-traditional, I mean, like if you want to talk about analytics or anything like that, I think those are biased and flawed too. I mean, there are so many kind of angles to this, and I would say I think Shakeia probably knows more about this than I do. Even I know we've worked on stuff, we've had those conversations, we've worked on things like that. We've run a bunch of articles at BP. Rob Arthur has written many of them about Black coaches, like for Black catchers. There aren't a lot of Black catchers. A lot of catchers turn into managers, and so you lose kind of that connection of managers in the game and being able to bring other people like them on. So that's one aspect of it. We've written about how white players tend to get promoted at different rates, even just as players, as prospects in the game, compared to Black players, Afro-Latino players, just players of color in general. I mean, all of this is a huge part of it. And I absolutely think, again, traditional scouting is biased and flawed. I think analytics are biased and flawed because a lot of it is about who gets the opportunity. If you look at these showcase events, they cost a lot of money. If you look at travel baseball, it costs a lot of money. I think teams try and find talent where it is? Absolutely. But I think a lot about the number of players who we never even see. And I don't mean they're out there playing baseball. I mean people who never pick up a glove and a ball, who never pick up a bat because they know that that's not really a future for them. And we're missing so many of those players, and not ever seeing, not seeing them when they're on the field. And a lot of them don't even get to the field. And it's just entrance opportunities. And look, I know, I've talked to people at the league office. They're interested in addressing that, but I don't know that we've made a lot of headway on that front. And again, it goes to managers, it goes to front office, front office folks. The number of general managers or president of baseball ops of color is minuscule. And I think, I've talked to people, whether it's women or people of color in front offices or who have worked for teams, and there's a lot of frustration there right now still, despite the diversity pipeline, despite the various things the league has done. And it's not that I don't think they're trying, but I don't think it's working. I think people are really frustrated, kind of still feeling like outsiders, despite being in these front offices, and feeling like their opportunities aren't there for them to advance the way they are for others.
Is MLB planning to study the performance impacts of their minor league experiment with the new rules?
Well, I don't, I mean, they studied the changes. They did all these rules at various levels to isolate kind of the impacts and figure out which ones they wanted to implement and how they might operate together. I don't know that I would say it was like the cleanest experiment, but I'm also not sure I'm answering the question, and specifically kind of what you might mean by performance impacts. So I think you might be asking like what it means on the field, what the game will look like. Again, I think they tried to isolate those things, and then they used the AFL to put a bunch of them together. And again, I think they're trying. I don't know if it's possible to really predict, to use the minors to predict exactly how it's going to work in the majors. There are kind of differences between what the teams in the minors are trying to accomplish versus what the teams in the majors are trying to accomplish, and how much they're willing to exploit various kind of aspects of new rules in play. So I think there can be some unintended consequences, but I think they're trying to do it in a way that's different than, I'm sure people here remember the neighborhood rule changing, and it was such a disaster that they had to change it back in season. I don't think we're going to see anything like that. So, again, I'm not sure if I answered your question. If not, I apologize. Feel free to clarify, but hopefully that gets at it a little bit.
If you found yourself the new owner of an expansion team, who would be the first person you tried to hire to run your baseball ops department?
Oh, that is a great question. Can I use nepotism? Can I just hire my friends? No, I mean, look, that's a really good question. I think, look, I don't think this is highly creative. I think there are some very elite general managers out there right now. I think, again, this is a bias from being a Dodger, but like Farhan Zaidi, Andrew Friedman, guys like this who have shown how it works. Again, I think you look at what they're able to do from the ground up in terms of player development, in terms of major league on-field acquisition. Again, hiring people who can build a full system from the start. Again, this is not a creative answer, but that's probably where I would go. I think there are a few elite general managers out there, and if I can have my pick of anyone, I'd probably start there and then kind of, maybe try and be more creative elsewhere. But I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of starting with the proven best, so to speak.
What do you believe the future will be for the ghost runner rule?
I think it's here to stay, and I absolutely hate it. I absolutely hate it. I don't think it's like, I think it's antithetical to so I think the league wants shorter games, and it's not antithetical to that. I think it ends games earlier than they would in terms of the number of innings played. But I don't know how it is for everyone else, but when I see a game get to the 10th inning, and the zombie runner, ghost runner, whatever you want to call it, the Manfred man, whatever you want to call it, comes out, the game slows down. I'm sure it's measurable, but for me, it feels immeasurably that it slows down. A runner on second, being able to look in at the side. I know they have the pitch comm, but I know they they start waiting these guys out. The pitcher immediately slows down, and it's intentional. And I just think, like, why are we jumping to the slowest part of this game? And I understand, look, I know a single gets them in, or a bunt and a sac fly gets them in. And I understand they don't want to throw guys. They don't want to have teams throw 14, 15, 16 innings. But I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here, and I apologize. But I'm very annoyed that teams optimize their pitching staffs and their bullpens to, I think, intentionally not, plan. They optimized to win every single game. And they said, we're not going to leave any slack in our bullpen. We're not going to have a mop-up guy. We're not going to build a bunch of guys who can go multiple innings. We're going to take a bunch of one-inning guys who throw max effort, throw high velocity, and they're going to help. That's going to optimize our chance to win every individual game. But what it does do is mean if you play 18 innings, you've got a bunch of no one to soak up that slack. You've got all these guys that you plan on throwing in high leverage situations, or can only go an inning or something like that. And it wrecks the bullpen for a week. And then the team scrambles, and they hate it. They don't want to have to scramble, and they don't want to deal with the fallout of not planning for this kind of disaster event. But I think they should be forced to plan for the disaster event. And if you don't do it, you should suffer the consequences. And I think this rule just absolutely bails them out, and only plays into this kind of efficiency and look, the league wants more offense, and they're helping teams build bullpens that will stymie offense. I mean, these guys who throw max effort, 97 miles per hour with a wipeout slider, and can't go more than 3 or 4 batters, they really stymie offense. And when they're put in a situation to be punished for creating the whole bullpen out of these guys, the league bails them out. I absolutely hate it.
I don't mind it, actually. I'm one of those people.
That's okay. I mean, different strokes. Everyone's happy to, that's fine.
But I will say that the reason that I like it is just because I'm petty. It makes everyone so angry that I feel like I have to like it, right? Like, it's like people get so irrationally upset about it. I'm like, well, now I'm rooting for it. Like, now I'm rooting for chaos. Like, I'm rooting for meltdowns.
And darn well, I appreciate that pettiness from you. I have the same thing in other situations. I can't fault anyone for that.
Yeah, like, it's so petty, but you know me, I'm gonna root for inconvenience above all else.
Absolutely.
Many Division I college baseball programs have been cut in the past few decades, including at big sports schools. How has this changed outlooks for prospects, drafts, scouting, etc.?
Well, I think there's a lot of interplay with this stuff. They've cut the draft. The draft used to be until everyone passed. It used to be 50 rounds. It used to be 40 rounds. And the league, after, during the 2020 season, cut the draft to 5 rounds. And then they with the ability to reinstate it up to 20. So I think it is back to 20, but that's half of what it used to be before. And so I think there's a lot of interplay in terms of how the league deals with this and how the NCAA deals with this. I don't know. I honestly don't know kind of how much they communicate on things like that, but I think they are kind of responding to one another in these situations. It does sound like there's some more money coming in for additional full-time coaches at the college level. I'm not super up on college baseball, so if that's wrong, A, I apologize, and B, it's an area, again, I'm not as much up on, so I'm speaking a little off the top of my head, but I think I think there's a natural interplay between those things happening. The minor leagues getting smaller obviously is a huge part of that. You shorten the draft, You reduce the number of players in the minor leagues overall. They cut 40 plus teams, and it sounds like in the last negotiations in the CBA, they were looking to potentially cut another team per organization at this point. So I think there's a connection between those things in terms of how it's changed outlooks for the prospects. I think again, there's just less opportunity there, and I think that's a shame. I think the best thing MLB could be doing at any point is keeping this game as accessible as possible. I think it's an absolute shame that they closed down. Look, I understand they had problems with the facilities for these 40 teams or whatever the reasons are, but the opportunity for people to go see baseball, whether it's and quality baseball at that, whether it's at the minor league level, whether it's at college level, whether it's just, again, as I talked about before in my answer for why baseball is so white, about making it accessible for people to pick up and play, all of this, MLB should be, in my opinion, providing as much funding and as much opportunity to make this game accessible to fans, to players, to at every single level, whether they're in charge of that level or not. They're not in charge of the NCAA, but should they be doing what they can to make it accessible and available to everybody? I think so.
Who will be the next Astros GM? Will they promote from within Andrew Ball, or will they go in another direction?
Yeah, I mentioned Andrew Ball, my fake team's colleague once upon a time. Look, I think that would be great. I love to, I don't bug him, but I'd love to even tangentially know another general manager. But look, I think the answer is they'll go in another direction. I think that's the answer, because if it was going to be Bill Firkus or Andrew Ball, or I know there's a third person kind of co-running the team in terms of baseball ops with them, whose name is escaping me right now. I think if it was going to be one of them, it would be one of them already. Instead, it's and the answer here is it might be external, but the answer in terms of who's running this team is Jim Crane. It's also Jeff Bagwell and maybe Dave Winfield, or I'm sorry, not Dave Winfield, Reggie Jackson. I apologize. But those guys are advising Jim Crane, and Jim Crane is making the negotiations with Rafael Montero. He's the one reaching out to people. I think, there were some really interesting notes in reports that came out that when he hired James Click originally, Jim Crane wanted to hire the assistants for Click and then be able to promote them after a very short term. I think Click used his leverage to avoid that happening, but once his deal was up, he was out the door. And Jim Crane wants to have more control over this team, and he's the owner, so he can get it, no matter how weird it looks coming off a World Series victory. He can go about doing that. So, I don't know who it's going to be. I think it will be someone external, but I think the real answer is that it's Jim Crane running that team.
I'm looking for the next question here. Over 80% of all players ever drafted since 1965 have never played in the bigs. They languish in the minors. Player evaluation has got to change.
Well, that's an interesting way to look at it. I would look at it as there are only so many opportunities, right? So right now there are 26 spots across, for each of the 30 teams. That's just not that much compared to even the pared back minor leagues. That's just not a large percentage. And so not all of these guys can be major league quality. I mean, that's the reality. If they were all truly the ability to be at that elite level to be major league quality, we should be arguing for expansion. I don't know that it's about player evaluation. I think there are only so many slots, and I think it's unfair. And I'm not, I think there are guys who are major league quality that don't always make it, or that get pushed out for various reasons. I would argue this is a reason to make sure minor leaguers are compensated fairly, and not forced to leave the game ahead of time. But I think those are kind of the root causes, as opposed to necessarily kind of failure of player evaluation. Certainly players are missed, but I kind of think under any circumstance, I can't imagine a framework under which no one is missed. You know what I mean? I think you always have to kind of be pushing and expanding to try and make sure you're finding, new talents or deserving talents. And there's always kind of a cutoff of someone who's on the outside looking in.
Which team is most in need of a trade to rebalance their roster? Which team is most in need of a trade to rebalance their vibes? Those are great questions.
I love that. I gotta tell you, I think the vibes in Boston are not great right now. I mean, I don't mean that to be a recency thing with Xander Bogaerts departing for the Padres, but it's really tough talking to a Boston fan in your life right now. If you know one, maybe give them a call, give them a hug. Things aren't going great for them. Look, everyone knew what Chaim Bloom was brought in to do when they hired him, and when it was to trade Mookie Betts, really, and I don't know that you ever really lived that down, but that's what he was brought in to do, and he went and did it. And you can discuss and argue the success. As a Dodgers fan, I know how I feel about it. I feel great about it. I don't imagine Boston fans love it. I know there are some who think it was fine. But that being said, like, to not be remotely on the same page with Xander Bogaerts. I mean, look, maybe the Padres came in out of nowhere with this 11-year, $280 million offer, and that's not close. But 6/160, which was the reported offer, I think, from Alex Spire at the Globe, that's not going to get it done. And they had to know it wasn't going to get done. And this is, again, this was a guy that signed with them at 16 out of Aruba. This is the homegrown talent every other team is looking for. And you're giving them, and this is kind of a repeat of what happened with Mookie. Honestly, they were giving him these either hometown discount type offers or just ones that weren't going to get it done. And I don't understand the process there. Look, maybe it'll save money in the long run, and I understand that process. I don't really respect it, but I understand it. But this is someone who should have stayed on that team, and you have Rafael Devers there, for one more season before he's a free agent. And I think this is kind of the answer to both questions from Scott, which is, maybe they need, look, if they're not going to retain Xander, I know they just went and got Trevor Story, but again, this was a really disappointing season last year, and you're losing some of your better players. It doesn't really, on some level, make sense to keep Devers if you're not going to keep Mookie and you're not going to keep Xander. So maybe that's my answer for both questions. I'm sure there are other ones that apply, but I think that's up there. Yeah.
Do you foresee major league expansion occurring in the next few years? And if so, to which cities?
I do. I'm not sure specifically which cities, but I think coming off the 2020 season, where as much as I like to critique Major League Baseball owners and their discussions of their finances, I do believe many teams lost money that year, not having fans in the stands and things like that. I don't feel sorry for them. I think they've made money most of the years, and that's fine. But I think they did lose it, and I think they don't like that. And I think one way to recoup fees is, or recoup some of those losses, is expansion fees. I mean, it's guaranteed money in their pockets. And we've seen them pursue guaranteed money in their pockets time over time. We've seen it with exclusivity to television networks. We've seen exclusivity to streaming networks. And I don't always disagree. I don't always agree with these strategies. I often don't agree with these strategies, but they really prioritize short-term guaranteed money. The most recent thing we saw them get in that category is the $900 million for their remaining 15% stake in BAMTech, their advanced media company, which Disney now owns fully. So every team got a $30 million payout from that this off. Well, I don't know when the money's dispersed, but that deal closed this off season. I think in the next few years, they're probably going to look for another, guaranteed payout for themselves. And again, the easiest way to do that is to add two teams. In terms of the cities, I think you're going to hear the usual ones. I'm kind of skeptical on Las Vegas. I don't think Oakland moves there. I think they're being used. They just spent a ton of money as a city on not only the Raiders stadium, but the Aviators, the AAA for Oakland's. That stadium was redone. It's actually really nice, but I don't think there's a huge appetite for it there. Portland, Nashville, San Antonio, Charlotte, maybe two of those four cities, possibly Montreal, I guess, if there's a real push there, something like that.
Oh wow, Craig, the questions just keep coming. These will be the last couple questions, you guys. It's actually been almost an hour. Are you cool with answering like 3 more questions, Craig?
Absolutely.
Okay. Speaking of Boston, and I apologize if I mispronounce this, it's a name I've only read. Were you surprised by their offer to Masataka Yoshida? It seems like they offered him much more than most people thought he'd get.
Yeah, so I'm going to preface this with saying, like, I am not a deep follower of the NPB. I know our projections for 2023, our PCOTA projections, to call back to before, really like him offensively, but he's limited defensively, and I think there are concerns for someone with his size. I think he's on the smaller side of things to kind of replicate that power output in the U.S. So look, I read some of the ESPN article I think Kylie McDaniel put out tonight. It sounds like a lot of the people around the game were not bidding as heavily as Boston. And I saw this online, and I apologize who said it. I think it was a Boston reporter, maybe Chris Smith. But he noted, like, before the year they offered Xander Bogaerts, I think 5 year an extension of 5 years and $90 million, to kind of adjust his opt out, which is what they end up essentially giving Yoshida. And it's like, well, Yoshida might be very good, but he's never played in the U.S. I think there's a bigger question mark there. I do think he can hit, but I don't think he's the play. Xander Bogaerts just put, if you use Fangraphs for, I think, a 6-win season. He was a very good player by BP's WARP. I guess I have some questions about kind of like what makes you offer them the same kind of amount of money when I would feel much more confident giving that kind of money to Bogaerts. So yeah, I am a little bit surprised by that. And yeah, I don't know. I'm surprised by that in and of itself, and especially, juxtaposed next to the Bogaerts decision.
What's your take on the long-term free agent signings? 10 to 12 years is a long time in baseball years.
Yeah, I think we're seeing Major League Baseball kind of adopt some of what, again, and I'm not a big hockey person, but what I know I've seen or at least heard people discuss who follow hockey, in terms of, I remember there were these deals when there's a cap, they stretch out the deal to lower the average annual value and give the team kind of more money to work with in the short term, and kind of figure there's something that they can do to kind of either sidestep it or just live with the back end of these deals. I think a lot of big free agent deals, teams go in expecting to eat the back end of those contracts in the first place. Now, they'll still complain about it and use it to try and drive down prices later for new free agents. But I think they do go in knowing that that's going to happen on the back end, or that there's a good possibility it's going to happen. So if you're going to commit to someone for, let's say, 8 years or 9 years anyway, why not make it 11, lower the value for the player? They get a couple extra years of they're going to get more overall value if you extend it to 11. I'm sure it's not the same exact offer, but they're going to get a little bit more money. Again, if Trey Turner was going to be 38 instead of 40 at the end of this contract. He's probably not going to get a big contract at the age of 38 just because of how old he is. So it's worth it for him to kind of sacrifice it, a little average annual value on that end. It's worth it for the team to gain the immediate and midterm flexibility. And long term, it's trouble, but there's we saw Seattle get out of we saw the Mets get out of Robinson Cano's deal with that trade with Seattle. There are kind of creative ways to do this, and if enough teams are doing it, you can kind of do these kind of sunk cost trades that we see in like the NBA a lot. That's essentially like you're trading the contract more than you are the player, that kind of thing. So I think it's just kind of adapting to the way and treating the CBT not entirely as a cap, but in a lot of ways because of how much average annual value matters towards the tax. It's a way of playing with that financially and tweaking it. I don't think it's a huge deal, because I think a lot of these, again, Trey Turner was looking for at least 8 years probably anyway. Aaron Judge was looking for obviously more than the 7 years that the Yankees offered in the first place. So it just doesn't, the extra couple years on the end aren't a huge deal.
Okay. I mean, I was going to ask this question too. So here's the Aaron Judge question. When all is said and done, it's 2031. Will the Yankees regret this contract?
This is so I've been talking about this, and I've been trying to figure out where I land on this. So I have a few kind of perspectives on it. One is this $40 million a year for 9 years is a lot. And when I first saw the 360 million figure, I honestly, as I just talked about in the last answer, I thought it might be 11 or 12 years. Just because to get to that figure, I thought they'd say, again, we're eating the back half of this deal anyway, or the back third of this deal anyway. Let's lower the AAV and still give him the total figure he wants. It's obviously a massive number. And that's a way to get it done and give ourselves some room to play with. They didn't do that. They went, 9 years is still a lot, but $40 million a year is a huge AAV hit. And so I was earnestly surprised about that. I have a lot of concerns about how someone as big and tall as Aaron Judge ages. And it's nothing against Aaron Judge. He's a hell of an athlete. And that's why he's unique. And it's why he's earned this deal. He had the best walk year ever, basically in baseball, maybe in any sport. It was a staggering season. And I think he earned the leverage. I think this negotiation especially is a masterclass in teaching people what leverage is, because I guarantee you the 1 year, as good a year as it was, didn't change their outlook on his performance. From these teams are looking to pay people for what they're going to do, not what they've done. That's the reality. That's what they're looking to do. What the players do is say, I've earned something else, right? And that's where the negotiation happens. And he went from 7 years and $213 million or so ballpark to 9 years and $360 million. That's leverage. That's because the year he had on the field didn't change their projections that much. It might have moved it substantially, but they didn't change them that much. But what it did change was his importance to the team, his importance to the fan base, his importance to the league, and what it means for jersey sales, for ticket sales, for merchandise and advertising, and what he means to their brand, what he means to whether he's whether there's a potential Hall of Fame case and whether he goes in as a Yankee, all of that stuff. He made an impact on all of those categories, and that gave him leverage. And he made his market, again, you've got the Giants involved, you had the Padres involved. This is all leverage, right? This is his ability to play those teams off each other. I don't know if any of those teams necessarily feel great about a $360 million contract for a 6'7" player who's at 31 already. But it does mean the Yankees had to pay that rate, right? So they can bid it up and know the Yankees really are in a tough spot and have to pay up. So I know I'm kind of talking around whether they'll regret it. I'm going to say they're not going to regret it because they're the Yankees. The reality is they have the money to pay Aaron Judge $40 million a year, even when he, might not be worth it in the long run. And still, and pay Garrett Cole what they're paying him, and go out and pay other free agents and build their team as aggressively as they want. They're the Yankees. They can do this. And it just doesn't matter. So on a strict dollars per WAR perspective, well, first of all, I would note most elite players are underpaid in the first years, even when they're making $40 million. If he's a 10 WAR player, if he's an 8 WAR player, he's clearing that $40 million mark, first of all. But even if he ages poorly and they have to eat it, there's not really an opportunity cost unless they decide for there to be an opportunity cost. And Hal has chosen that repeatedly. So maybe he will, but he doesn't have to, and they don't have to let his contract situation really impact them and what they're able to do on the field. So I don't have a firm answer for you there, but there are multiple perspectives going on. I do need to say, the one thing is, when I mention his size, is there's a reason for this. I read the Joe Sheehan newsletter, and he pointed out he had this list of 6'6" players from age 31 on, and it's the WAR kind of leaderboard for this. And he used Baseball Reference WAR, but the top guy was Dave Winfield, and it was his WAR was in the 20s. The second guy I'm blanking on, the WAR was 18. The third guy was Giancarlo Stanton, and it was 3. Adam Wainwright was 5th on the list as a hitter. Adam Wainwright as a hitter is in the top 5 for WAR among guys 31 or older, 6'6" or taller. It's a tough list. These guys just tend not to age that well. Now, again, Judge is a physical freak, and that's to his credit. And so I don't think he's going to look. I think he'll easily clear Adam Wainwright and all these, all those other guys. But it's a tough list, and it's teams are looking at things like that when they go into these processes.
Well, that was fun. You got a lot of really interesting questions. You got a lot of really interesting questions. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Craig. It was really fun.
Of course. Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure.
Apparently, your takes are very welcome around here.
Well, I'm very available. Happy to provide them. Thank you for giving me the platform to do it.
Yeah, no problem. Bye, everyone. Craig, don't.
Thank you, everyone. It was an absolute pleasure.